miscarriage. I could go on and on. So they have not had the experiences of what it is to be a woman. Okay. But they are also not men anymore. They have their own set of experiences that I will never experience, that a woman would never experience, that we should look at, and we should cherish those experiences and those challenges that they've made it through in their lives. And we should venerate them just as we would any other group of individuals has their own experiences and challenges that we should always consider. Why that isn't enough for trans women, I'm not entirely sure. I understand that they wish they were women, but the fact of the matter is they simply were not born that way, and that's all there is to it.
You mentioned menstruation, right? I remember from reading the book that that was a very important point, because if you menstruate, you're kind of losing blood, and from what I understand, the amount of blood that we have is crucial for your like
Athletic
performance. There you go. Thank you.
Sure.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that in the book?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, we all know the basics of menstruation. There's a period when there's an egg that's ovulated out of one of the two ovaries and travels down the fallopian tubes towards the uterus. If it is fertilized along the way, that typically happens within the fallopian tubes, then the uterus is sitting there prepared with an enormous amount of blood supply to it and a thickening of the uterine wall to make it capable of taking an implanted embryo to then start the process of pregnancy and gestation. However, if there is no sperm present or that egg was not fertilized, then basically the uterus says, okay, well, not this month, we'll try again next month. And it flushes all of that blood and additional material that it put down to take in a fertilized embryo and flushes it out. And basically it just starts over again. And the reason it does that is that anytime we build up a lot of blood supply and a lot of tissue in one area, it's metabolically costly. And so if we're not going to use it, you're going to lose it. And so women, once a month, if everything is going as it should, will lose a significant amount of blood that has to then be replaced. So athletic performance tends to dip pretty significantly during that time, and then it improves thereafter. But not just that. There are these fluctuations in hormones have significant consequences to the connective tissues of women, particularly when we're talking about ligaments and tendons, ligaments mostly. Women are much more prone to getting ACL tears, so the anterior cruciate ligament within the knee, significantly more. They're more likely to get an ACL tear than men by a lot, and that happens around specific times during the estrous cycle more so than others. When there's a lot of estrogen present within the female system, ligaments tend to get more lax. They get more stretchy. And when estrogen levels decrease and progesterone levels go up, they tighten up again. Those are things that a trans woman is not going to experience because they're going to take a steady dose of estrogen the entire time that they're on hormone replacement therapy. They're not going to go up and then come down and go up and come down as a woman would. So there is another advantage right there. One, genetically, that person is a male. So genetically, their tissues, their connective tissues tend to be stronger than females to begin with. And there's no evidence that that changes when we take hormone replacement therapy. And then two, without those fluctuations up and down, we don't have a laxity that's developing within those particular trans women. Now, we don't have data that's been collected on this yet because there simply aren't enough trans women athletes who have been subjected to that level of training where they're starting to see ACL tears. But we'll see how that happens as we move forward. I'm sure that there will be more. Right now, the best evidence that we have is to suggest that trans women will have a significant athletic advantage over women in as much as they will not be prone to as many injuries because genetically they're male.
Would you say that's the main difference?
In terms, no. That is one of many, but that is not the main difference.
I think it's important to list them because otherwise people can very easily just say, "Oh no, you're discriminating." No, like you're not. You studied that. There's a lot of difference. So you just mentioned one of them. What I would say is like one of the biggest of them.
So the biggest difference you see between men and women is muscle mass.
Muscle mass, yeah.
That is the biggest one. Now, there have been studies where they take a non-athlete population, they go through hormone replacement therapy, and then they check what they look like afterwards in terms of their hematocrit, which is the total number of red blood cells that we have floating around in our blood, their total muscle mass, bone mineral density, and fat mass. All of those things change to look more like women. The hematocrit decreases because there's less testosterone in the system. The estrogen makes it so that there is a loss of some muscle mass because there's no testosterone to pump it up. And bones, they may decrease in their density a bit, but there's also quite a bit of evidence that having a steady level of estrogen instead of fluctuations has a bone saving property in trans women that women don't necessarily see. So all of these things constitute some changes that will obviously bring down some level of athletic performance. The problem is this: none of the studies have actually looked at an athlete population going through transition over time. There's a single study that is a cross-sectional study. In other words, we're comparing one group of people to another group of people. And that's never as strong as looking at one group of individuals followed over time. So in the studies that we've looked at so far, the most recent one that was published that a lot of folks that are pro trans women in sports are touting as evidence that there's no difference. They took a group of men who transitioned to be women who were athletes, and we see decrements in, again, not athletic performance, but just laboratory measures that correlate with athletic performance. So hematocrit decreases, muscle mass decreases, and fat mass increases. And they also did grip strength. So how tight we can grip a hand dynamometer, that decreases as well. A couple of problems. One, we have no idea where their measures were. Actually, so I shouldn't say that they decreased because we don't have a pre-measure. All they had was a comparison of after the transition, the women group with the trans women group, and comparing those two. But we don't know what the trans women looked like before they went through the transition because it's not a longitudinal study. And maybe they didn't change at all. Maybe all these folks had weak grip strength. We just don't know. And so what needs to happen in terms of a laboratory study is that we need to take a group of individuals who are athletes, men, who are determined they're going to go through a transition, and then follow them over time and measure them in terms of their athletic skills, not necessarily laboratory stuff. If they're runners, I want to see what their best run time is in their particular event before their transition and then after their transition. That's the only thing that really matters. Everything else that we would measure in a laboratory are all correlates of athletic performance and not athletic performance itself.
And I mean, that's really important because the more data there is, the more you can say just, hey, guys, look, there is a difference. Look at that data and that data. Like the more you have, like you start piling up all of those things, like, and then the unfair advantage becomes undeniable because right now it's, can you say deniable? Is that a word? Yeah, undeniable. Yeah, a little bit. They try with a lot of good intentions. They try to make it deniable. Yeah.
They're certainly trying to. I would not say that it's a deniable position.
Oh, okay.
No, I think it's quite clear. I mean, you don't need 50 examples. You need one. If you have a precedent that's set where one person clearly had an unfair advantage over the field, and we have that with Leah Thomas, then the precedent is set. And if it happens one time, it's not fair. And so, a lot of folks that are pro trans women in sport, they have three basic arguments, but the primary one is, well, these people aren't setting records. They're not winning every single event they're entering in by miles. And my point is, why does that matter at all? So let me give you an example. My daughter had a swim meet this last weekend. It was a 3-day swim meet, and it was one where we had preliminaries in the morning and finals in the afternoon, and you had to qualify to come back for finals. So this was the first time that she's ever actually qualified to come back for finals. And I can tell you how much that meant to her. It was an enormous accomplishment to finally make the top 8 in races that she competed in and come back and swim again that night to try to swim faster. Had she been bumped out of 6th, 7th, or 8th place by biological boys, that would be remarkably hurtful to know that they have the advantage over her and they also get to displace her from her rightful spot. That's basically what happens right now within women's sports, is that you have a biological male who is displacing women from their rightful positions. So even if you don't win the race, doesn't matter. If you make the championship final, that's a huge honor in itself. And if you get bumped out of your respective space because a male took it, that's simply not fair. So all we need is one example, and we have Leah Thomas, and we actually have several more examples thereafter.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I didn't know. I heard a lot about Leah Thomas, but I didn't know there were many, many more. Um, Dr. Hudson, I have a question about the test, though. I remember that when reading your book, you mentioned that I'm not sure if it's a specific test. You correct me if I'm wrong, or generally
Mhm.
speaking, most of those tests that are done before doing sports. Apparently, some of them are very sensitive, though. Depending on the time of the day or the weather outside, they might highly interfere with the result. Is that one of the reasons why those tests are not being conducted more?
No, the test that we're looking at, everything in this is predicated on testosterone levels.
Okay.
So the tests that we're talking about are just simple blood tests to check the amount of testosterone present within somebody's system immediately before competition.
Oh, okay.
So the NCAA had a series of rules. Now they didn't actually set their own standard in terms